North Korea is one of the most isolated countries on Earth. For most of us, everything we know about it comes from carefully selected images, military parades, enormous monuments, perfectly organized crowds, and the bright skyline of Pyongyang. But what is everyday life actually like once you go beyond those images? Entering North Korea is very different from visiting almost any other country. Foreign tourists are normally accompanied by official guides, their movements are restricted, and many places are simply not accessible to outsiders. What visitors see can therefore represent only a small, carefully controlled part of the country. Pyongyang is the showcase. Wide boulevards cut through the capital. Monumental buildings dominate the skyline. Metro stations are decorated with chandeliers, marble and enormous murals. At first glance, parts of the city can look surprisingly modern. But Pyongyang is not North Korea as a whole. Travel outside the capital and the picture can change dramatically. Smaller towns and rural areas may have fewer cars, older infrastructure and a much slower pace of life. Agriculture remains an important part of everyday existence for many families. Then there is something almost invisible to a visitor: information. Most North Koreans cannot simply open the global internet, search whatever they want, or watch foreign media freely. Instead, information is heavily controlled, creating a world where what people can see about the outside is very different from what we take for granted. And that raises the biggest question: if Pyongyang is the North Korea the world is allowed to see, what does the rest of the country look like? That is where the story becomes much more complicated. For many North Koreans, daily life looks very different from the carefully presented image of the capital. Outside Pyongyang, smaller cities and rural regions often have simpler infrastructure, fewer private vehicles, and a much stronger dependence on local markets and agriculture. One of the most important parts of everyday life is food. North Korea has struggled with food shortages at different points in its modern history, and access to food can vary greatly between regions and families. Official distribution systems exist, but informal markets have also become an important part of how many people obtain basic goods. These markets are known as jangmadang. They began growing during the economic crisis of the 1990s and gradually became a major part of daily life. People buy and sell vegetables, clothing, household items, and sometimes imported products. This created something unexpected inside one of the world's most controlled economies: a growing informal marketplace. Electricity is another major difference between areas. While central parts of Pyongyang may appear brightly lit, satellite images have famously shown much of North Korea far darker at night than neighboring South Korea or China. And yet life continues. People work, children go to school, families celebrate birthdays and weddings, and communities develop routines just like anywhere else. But almost every part of that routine exists inside a system where travel, employment and access to information can be heavily restricted. And perhaps the biggest divide is not between North Korea and the outside world. It is between the North Korea shown to visitors, and the North Korea experienced by the people who live there every day. One of the biggest differences between life in North Korea and life almost anywhere else is access to information. Most people do not have open access to the global internet. Instead, the country operates a domestic network with government-approved websites, educational material, news, and other controlled content. Foreign television, movies, music, and news are also heavily restricted. That means many people can grow up knowing very little about how the outside world actually lives. But information still finds ways in. Over the years, foreign movies, television shows, music, and digital files have reportedly crossed the border through unofficial channels. USB drives and memory cards can carry something extremely powerful: a glimpse of another world. And that creates a problem for a government built around controlling the national story. Travel is restricted too. Moving freely between different parts of the country is not always simple, and permission can be required for certain journeys. Even living in Pyongyang is considered a privilege that is not available to everyone. This creates a society where your location, job, education, and opportunities can depend heavily on your background and status. To outsiders, North Korea often looks frozen in time. But inside the country, people are still adapting. Markets grow. Technology slowly spreads. Smartphones exist. New buildings rise in Pyongyang. Young people find new ways to communicate and exchange information. So North Korea is not completely cut off from change. The real question is how long any country can keep the outside world at a distance when information keeps finding new ways to get in. North Korea understands the power of appearance. That is why Pyongyang is filled with monumental architecture, enormous public squares, colorful apartment towers, carefully maintained parks, and major construction projects. For foreign visitors, this is often the version of the country they see first. The capital is designed to communicate strength, order, and progress. But even inside Pyongyang, daily life is not always as polished as the official image suggests. Public transportation is extremely important. Private car ownership is limited compared with many other countries, so buses, trams, and the Pyongyang metro play a major role in everyday movement. The metro itself is one of the most striking places in the city. Some stations are deep underground and decorated with chandeliers, mosaics, marble, and dramatic artwork. They look more like grand halls than ordinary subway stations. North Korea also organizes enormous public performances, military parades, and synchronized events involving thousands of people. From the outside, these events can appear almost unreal. Everything is coordinated, every movement is timed, every image sends a message. But behind those carefully controlled scenes are millions of ordinary people living ordinary lives. Going to work, raising children, shopping at markets, traveling across cities, and trying to build a future. That contrast is what makes North Korea so difficult to understand. There is the country shown to the world. And then there is the country behind the image. What makes North Korea especially difficult to understand is that many of its most important rules are not visible to outsiders. People's lives can be shaped by where they are allowed to live, what jobs they can take, and what opportunities are available to them. The government also places enormous importance on loyalty and political education. State messages appear in schools, workplaces, public spaces, television, and newspapers. For many people, this is not something separate from daily life. It is part of daily life. Another important issue is movement. Leaving the country is extremely difficult for ordinary citizens, and crossing the border without permission can bring severe consequences. Even travel inside North Korea can be restricted depending on the destination. This creates a country where distance is not just geographical, it is political. Two people living in the same country can experience completely different realities depending on their location, status, and access to resources. At the same time, outsiders should be careful with extreme claims. Because North Korea is so closed, rumors can spread easily, and not every dramatic story about the country is reliable. The reality is already striking enough without exaggeration. A highly controlled society, limited information, restricted movement, and a carefully managed public image create one of the most unusual everyday environments in the modern world. And yet there is still one final question. What happens when someone decides they no longer want to live inside that system? For some North Koreans, leaving the country becomes the only way to discover what life outside really looks like. But escape is extremely dangerous. The border is heavily controlled, and those who attempt to leave without permission can face serious consequences. Many escapees have historically tried to cross into China before attempting to reach another country. For those who succeed, the outside world can be overwhelming. Suddenly, there is unrestricted internet, hundreds of television channels, supermarkets filled with products, freedom to travel, and constant access to information. Things that seem completely ordinary elsewhere can feel completely unfamiliar. Stories from defectors have helped the world understand North Korea, but their experiences are not all identical. Life can differ greatly depending on region, family background, occupation, and access to resources. That is important because North Korea is often described as if every person inside the country experiences exactly the same reality. They do not. Some people live in modern apartments in Pyongyang. Others live in rural villages. Some participate in growing local markets. Others depend heavily on state systems. What connects them is the extraordinary level of control surrounding information, movement, and public life. And this may be the biggest reason North Korea remains so fascinating to the outside world. We can see its borders. We can see its monuments. We can even see its cities from satellites. But understanding what life truly feels like inside is much harder. North Korea is not simply a mysterious place hidden behind a border. It is a country of millions of ordinary people living inside one of the most controlled systems in the modern world. And behind every carefully presented image lies a reality the outside world is still trying to understand.